Hi, I'm Paulina. Welcome to Paulina's Pages if you're new here, or welcome back if you're a returning subscriber, and thank you. Today I want to talk a bit about The Vanishing Half. Every Wednesday I do a series where I read the Women's Prize for Fiction. So this is the story of the Vin Tweens. The small town was called Mallard, and they ran off when they were 16, and up until that point they were identical, but then after that, from their families to race to their connections, everything becomes different. The sister who swore most passionately to never return is the one that comes back, and she comes back with a very black child. Mallard is a small city where through inbreeding, what people want to do is they want to make their children as white as possible. So they marry their family members, they marry their friends, they marry the whitest people. They have a white child, and through generations of this, even though they're technically black, they become white. And the other sister, her name is Stella, passes as white, and she goes to the city pretending that she is white. Even though Desiree also passes as white, Desiree marries a very black man, almost as if in rebellion. Stella, she wants to pass as white, and she has a white husband, she has a white child, and she lives this life of luxury, all while questioning herself, like, is she black, is she white? She has a very big identity crisis going on. And then after Desiree comes to Mallard with a black child who sticks out of place, and it's very uncomfortable for her child to grow up there because she's so black while everyone else places this emphasis on being white. Coincidental encounter, the sisters' paths cross again. This is a meticulous exploration of race, family, desires, the past, the way that we shape the past, and through taking care with her writing, Bennett really makes this a fantastic piece of historical fiction. Well, if you're interested to see what my complete predictions are for the Women's Prize for Fiction, I will be making a video on that once I finish all the books. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell to make sure you don't miss that. And all I can say for now is this will definitely be on the top of my list because I loved it, and let me tell you why. So although the pace started off slow, and I have been reading this for about a week, and that's because I basically didn't read it for a week. I just put it off, and I really didn't want to read it because I found it really hard to get into the story at first. But then literally yesterday, I was like, I have to make myself read this because, well, I need to do a video on this at some point. And I picked it up a little bit apprehensive. It was about like 30% through, and then things just picked up and I literally couldn't put it down after that. So what I want to say is give this book a chance because it does get better eventually. It felt like going back into like a very warm, cozy embrace. If you're absorbed into the story, you can put it away and then you can come back right to it. If you like family, like drama books, family saga books, this one is a must because it goes into way more depth than any other one I've seen so far. The only equal that I can think of right now is Pachinko. That one was also incredible. So there's so much I could talk about here whilst not giving away spoilers. In this video, there's mostly two things, but I'm still gonna split it into sections. So first, I wanted to talk about race and about Mallard. Bennett's mother is the person who inspired this book, and in an interview, Bennett said that although she knew that her mother grew up in Palmetto, her mother just kind of matter of fact dropped it on her. There are actually like small cities that want to inbreed to make what's called designer babies. You can change the genes to make your child have blue eyes and something like that. They're genetically engineering their kids to be whiter because they want them to have an easier life, and it's not actually the only like town that there were. This was my first time hearing about such a thing, and first of all, that's very disturbing. Our society makes me want to cry. It was just a very fascinating setting to set this book in. In the book, it's described that Desiree marries a very black man almost as if out of rebellion. She's the like wild one. She grew up in this city where I keep calling it a city. I'm not really sure what to call it because it's like a small place that's not even on any maps. Her big goal is to be different. She's in her teenage years. She wants to experience the life around her. Desiree has a temper. She's loud. She can't sit still, so people really can't believe it when it's Desiree who returns to the town. Stella chooses the easy way out, while Desiree chooses like the hard path of accepting being black in a world that's constantly putting her down, especially in this small minuscule setting where everyone knows each other and everyone has the same attitude towards black people. But at the same time, while Stella passing for white in the 60s and 70s especially might seem that it's making her life easier, and on the surface it is, does it necessarily make her life easier to exist and to just go around her life? And that's where it gets tricky, because no, she is paranoid. She's constantly scared that her white family will find out that she's actually black, to the point where she's more racist towards black people than the white people around her. Her husband is actually embarrassed by it. Her husband says he believed in a moderate country. What he wanted most, he always said, watching policeman club protesters on the news, was for everyone to get along. Yeah, and that's the problem. He wants everyone to get along, but at the same time, he's not willing to interfere when black people get beaten around by police in his neighborhood. He's all too happy to support Stella, who's scared that black people will realize that she's black and will expose her. He's all too happy to support her in her not wanting black people to move to their neighborhood. I just want people to get along, and then ignore as his white neighbors throw a brick through the windows of the black family that moved into their neighborhood. And he's not happy when he finds out that his wife visited the black family that eventually did manage to move in. He's happy to say, I wish everyone would get along, but then does nothing when he watches all of this go down, and he's like, oh, I'm progressive, I'm not racist. And that's a lie that he tells himself as he just lets all of this go on. What I felt was interesting was that Stella kind of embodies Mallard. She has a lot of this internalized hatred towards being black, because well, in the town everyone wanted to be white, and so when she is having a daughter, she doesn't think about her daughter's safety. All she thinks about is, I hope she's not black. And if she's black, she's already thinking about the next steps, I'd rather tell my husband that I had an affair with a black man than say that I am black. And these feelings of shame really haunt her. It's a hard thing for her to confront and for us to read about, because we have this person who just hates the idea of being black so much that when she sees other black people so scared that they're gonna lure her into her old life, because she doesn't want anything to do with her other family who realize that she's technically black even though she doesn't look black at all. In a city where everyone thinks she's white, she actually feels more black than if she were actually black, because in Mallard everyone knows that they're black and they're all striving towards whiteness, and in that city they're pale. They're described as the prettiest twins out there because they're pale, and that's what everyone wants. Her feelings, they're very relative, and she carries Mallard with her, even though it's been so many years that she pretends that she was born someplace else, that she pretends that she doesn't want to go back to her little city town because she says poverty. When her daughter asks her question why didn't you teach me to make cake, or didn't you say that your mother made this, and she's almost catching her on her lie, she'd rather say that they were in extreme poverty. Her excuse for not opening up about her past and not talking to her family is money. She'd rather they view her as a financial case, as a charity case, than a black person, because she's just so ashamed of being black. She knows that people around her place value on money, and she'd rather they think that she was poor, which to them is a slight, because everyone cares so much that they think that they're black, even though they're technically the nice white people, and we'll talk more about that later. She doesn't want black people to think that she's white, even though she's putting effort into being white. And she feels ashamed that she's passing and that she's using her whiteness that was a result of inbreeding and this whole complicated and disturbing city that wants to be white so much because of the pressures that society puts, especially in the 60s and 70s. She does all of this, and it's just exhausting and confusing to read about all these complicated paths to navigate towards what she thinks is whiteness. But she really doesn't want to be completely white, because I feel like she has this shame that she's doing all of this and leaving her real kinship behind. And what she ends up doing is she just ends up lashing out at other black people because she doesn't want them to recognize her, while at the same time that's what she wants. The parts about Stella were some of the most fascinating parts for me to read, because the book is written so well. It shows all of these confusing struggles that Stella has so well. It just feels like you're intruding by reading this book, because you're opening it on something that's very personal for her, and you're reading this book to educate yourself, but also to enjoy the story and the beautiful craft that the author has. So it just feels a lot like an intrusion on something so serious that she's really struggling with. Bennett really makes you ask questions about your own identity, especially if you're white, and asking questions like, what exactly makes you white? Is it the privilege? Is it just the skin? Yeah, I really could have used more chapters about Stella because there was like a chunk of the book that was about her and we really got into this topic, but then we just suddenly switched topics and I felt like a bit incomplete. And just the Vince sisters in general, towards the end we just kind of forget about them, and it's the vanishing half. It's the whole idea of a sister vanishing and choosing a different life, much like choosing an identity. Sisters could have been a bit more developed for me because I felt like they faded into the background a little, and also Mallard. So let's talk a little bit about Mallard. And when Desiree comes back with her daughter Jude, who's very dark, even though technically the people in the town realize that they're black and that their skin color is a result of their town's tradition of like inbreeding, they still treat Jude very much like an outcast because she didn't come from here, even though they love her mother and they're so happy, well, as happy. It's a complicated emotion what they feel towards her. She's one of them. At least that's what they feel like. Jude's grandmother, so Desiree's mother, she makes her put on a hat and like covering clothes to make sure that she doesn't get even more black than she already is. I just really wanted to know more about this town and the festivities that it had and some more people because it was mostly like the Veen family. The whole place felt more like an idea and a discussion of race and like what makes you white and what makes you black rather than a setting. I'm a believer that settings are important to the story. I feel like they should add depth to the story, and this was a good setting because it did add the depth, but at the same time it complemented the characters more rather than the characters complementing the place and the place complementing the characters and being like a mutual relationship type thing. But that's a stylistic choice. It's really not critical. That's just a personal preference of mine. I would have liked to have more of the town and of the traditions explored. Yeah, and going back to the whole complimenting and adding to the characters, another reason that I felt like Stella was an embodiment of Mallard was because Mallard is a small place. It's not on any maps. I'll let you read what happens to Stella towards the end, but what I will say is this is not a major spoiler, but there's not like a huge repercussion that happens in a way. You'll see what I mean. I really don't want to spoil anything for you because I feel like this is a very interesting read for everyone to read. Yeah. Stella does actually embody Mallard because she internalized those beliefs way more than Desiree, who was always like a rebellious child, even though she was the one that ended up coming back to the city, to the town. It's just a very interesting dynamic to have. So another thing I particularly loved here were the relationships. If more romance novels were like this, I would read them more. No spoilers about Desiree's later relationships, but I do want to talk about Jude. She has a complicated relationship with a trans man whose name is Therese, but he changed it to Reese later. And it's just written so well and in such a respectful way because the emotions portrayed are just so inherently human. There's really nothing I can say about that. It's like perfect. I was on the verge of tears almost every time they were reading it because they're just there so much for each other, and it's this dynamic of honestly mutually respecting each other. For example, when they first start to be in a deeper, more complex, central type of relationship, Reese doesn't really want Jude to touch him, and she doesn't touch him. And then later they start to save up money and work together to get Jude an operation for his chest, because one of the reasons that he didn't want Jude to touch him was because he had binding on his chest. If you don't know what binding is, it's when trans people wrap a bandage around their chest because they don't want that part of their chest to be shown. There's other reasons that's more personal. I don't want to speak for the trans community, so if you're interested in the topic, Google's at your hands. It's a very painful thing for Reese to undergo because it's like the 60s and 70s and you can't get this operation legally, so they have to go to a doctor who could lose his license, and it's a whole ordeal. But the bandage, it's really tight and it's like cutting into his skin, and there's bruises and there's a bit of swelling, and it's like a really painful experience for him, and they get through it together. And he also has hormone therapy, and Jude, she's helping him like put the hormones into his body, and it's just such an intimate experience. Again, it's just so respectful. And I just really wish that more relationships were like this, because they don't always have to be like the passionate happiness of modern romance. Just this feeling of not always understanding but still being for each other is what I really liked. And I realized that I wanted to talk more about relationships, but then I also realized that that's going to include more spoilers, so I'll cut short on this here. But what I do want to say is recent Jude, hashtag OTP from now on. I also really like the idea that marriage isn't like necessary, so I'm not gonna go into that again for spoilers, but I just really like the idea that sometimes you need the emotional connection, and that's more important than actually having a legal document that says like, yeah, I'm married to him, whatever. Yeah, it's not really like a central theme, but it was just another instance of Bennett's fantastic characterization, and I really enjoyed the way that this played out and the way that this was explored. So I really like this book, and I do recommend picking it up. Of course, there were things that I didn't like the pace. That definitely put me off a bit, and 100% that something that I would have preferred for the author to work on a bit. But at the same time, I felt like it was a little bit of a reference to how our life passes, where you think that nothing is passing and that you have a lot of time, but then suddenly it all ends. Sorry not to depress all of you. There weren't like many critical twists and turns to the story. I felt like it would have oversaturated it a bit and made the impact less than it should have been. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. I had high expectations and they were definitely met. I loved it so much, but at the same time I disliked some critical aspects, which is a bit confusing, but the book is special like that, Debbie Ryan. But yeah, thanks for watching this review. Leave a comment, talk to me about it, or you can DM me over at the Book Reviewing Fox on Instagram. Thanks so much for watching. Thank you, bye.